Aisha had only been married to Daniel for a few weeks when she attended her very first family dinner at his mother's house. She dressed neatly, carried herself with grace, and tried her best to fit in. The table was full of chatter, laughter, and the smell of traditional Zambian food. For a moment, she felt hopeful. Maybe this would be her chance to truly belong. But then, as the plates were being passed around, Daniel's mother leaned toward one of the aunts and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. She only wants his money. The room didn't go silent. Instead, it filled with quiet chuckles. Daniel's cousins exchanged knowing glances and laughed openly, one of them muttering, "Gold digger." Another smirked, "Pretty face, empty pockets." The words hit Aisha like knives. She lowered her gaze to her plate, forcing herself to chew slowly even though every bite felt heavy. Her cheeks burned, her hands trembled slightly under the table, but she refused to let them see her break. She didn't argue, she didn't defend herself. She just sat there, swallowing both her food and her pride. Inside, her heart ached. These were supposed to be her new family, the people who would welcome her as Daniel's wife. Instead, they mocked her, judged her, and painted her as someone she was not. Aisha stayed silent, but deep inside, a fire started to burn. She promised herself that one day, the very people laughing at her would see the truth, and regret every whispered insult. The wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of Aisha's life. She wore her white gown with pride, her heart racing as she stood beside Daniel. Friends and family filled the hall, music played, cameras flashed, and everyone seemed to be celebrating love. But beneath the beauty of the moment, Aisha's ears caught words that cut deeper than any blade. As she moved through the crowd, smiling and greeting guests, she overheard Daniel's relatives huddled in a corner. His aunt whispered loudly, "She came with nothing but a pretty face." Another cousin chuckled, adding, "At least Daniel's ex had a real career. This one, she's just here to enjoy the soft life." The group burst into quiet laughter, sipping their drinks as though her entire worth could be measured by their gossip. Aisha's smile froze. On the outside, she looked radiant, graceful, the perfect bride. But inside, her chest tightened and her stomach churned. She wanted to disappear, to hide from the humiliation of being compared to a woman from Daniel's past, someone his family clearly wished had been in her place. She glanced at Daniel, who was too busy shaking hands and taking photos to notice the daggers being thrown at his new wife. Aisha held her head higher, forcing the tears back. If she allowed herself to cry, the whispers would only turn into louder laughter. So she kept smiling, playing the role of the joyful bride everyone expected her to be. But as the music swelled and she stood on the dance floor, Aisha whispered to herself, unheard by anyone else, "One day, you'll swallow your words." That vow etched itself deep in her heart. She knew she would never forget the sting of this day. She would turn that pain into power. And while they saw her as nothing more than a pretty face, she knew the truth. Her story was only beginning, and when the time came, those same mouths that mocked her would speak her name with respect. Every time Aisha visited Daniel's family, it felt less like a family gathering and more like walking into a battlefield. The moment she stepped into the living room, Daniel's sisters would exchange glances, roll their eyes, and smirk as though she were invisible. Conversations that should have been warm and welcoming always twisted into little daggers aimed at her heart. One afternoon, as tea was served, one of his sisters leaned back in her chair and asked with fake sweetness, "So Aisha, do you even know how to work? Or are you just waiting for Daniel to carry you forever?" The room burst into giggles. Another cousin added, "Maybe she thinks cooking and cleaning are too much for someone like her." Even Daniel's aunts joined in with whispers that floated just loud enough for Aisha to hear. Aisha felt her chest tighten, but she didn't flinch. She sipped her tea slowly, keeping her face calm. She knew if she argued back, they would only twist her words and call her disrespectful. So she swallowed the bitterness and let her silence speak louder than their mockery. Daniel sometimes shifted uncomfortably, but he never defended her. And that silence cut deeper than the insults themselves. What they didn't know, what none of them even imagined, was that Aisha's life was bigger than the picture they painted of her. Behind her quiet smiles and gentle answers, she was carrying a secret so powerful it could flip the entire room upside down. She remembered the gold mines her late father had left her, the empire quietly growing in her name. So while they laughed at her, Aisha planned. While they mocked her, she strategized. Every insult was fuel, every eye roll another reason to keep her identity hidden until the right moment. She walked away from those visits with her dignity intact, whispering to herself, "Let them laugh. One day their laughter will choke them." Daniel loved Aisha, and she never doubted that. He held her hand, spoke kindly to her, and always told her she was the best thing that ever happened to him. But when it came to his family, his love often went quiet. Whenever his mother or sisters mocked her, Daniel would lower his eyes, shift in his chair, or clear his throat nervously, but he never spoke up. His silence screamed louder than any insult. At first, Aisha hoped he would defend her, just once. She longed to hear him say, "That's my wife, respect her." But the words never came. Instead, he let the insults pass, as though they were harmless jokes. To Daniel, maybe it was easier to avoid conflict, to keep the peace. But to Aisha, every silence felt like a betrayal. She would sit at those family dinners, smiling politely while her heart ached. Alone in their bedroom later, she would cry quietly into her pillow, never letting Daniel see the full depth of her pain. Yet beneath the loneliness, something else was growing inside her, strength. She began to understand that her worth didn't depend on the approval of people who had already judged her before knowing her. When she closed her eyes, she often thought of her late father. She remembered the long trips to the Copperbelt, his strong hands showing her the land, his voice telling her, "This is yours to protect one day." Those memories reminded her of the gold mines he had left behind. Mines no one in Daniel's family knew existed. That secret gave her power. It reminded her she was not the helpless, empty-handed girl they believed her to be. She carried an inheritance that could change lives, an empire growing quietly under her name. So while Daniel's silence cut her, it also pushed her to lean on herself. She whispered into the dark, "One day, the truth will speak louder than any of them ever could." Every month, like clockwork, Aisha packed a small bag and told Daniel she had to handle some family matters. He never asked too many questions, only kissed her forehead and wished her a safe trip. To him, it was just a short visit to relatives. To her, it was something much bigger, something no one around her truly knew. As soon as she left Lusaka and traveled toward the Copperbelt, her heart always beat faster. The air smelled different there, the roads dustier, the land richer. When her car finally pulled up near the entrance of the gold mine, dozens of workers stopped what they were doing. Smiles lit up their faces as they greeted her with respect. "Good morning, Madam Owner." The first time she heard them call her that, tears had stung her eyes. Even now, the title carried weight. These people didn't see her as a gold digger or a burden. They saw her as a leader. She walked across the site in her safety helmet, the sound of machines humming in the background, men and women working with strength and skill. Inside the office, she reviewed the accounts carefully. She checked the numbers, signed contracts, approved new equipment, and discussed expansion plans with her managers. Every decision mattered, and she carried herself with the same calm confidence she never showed in front of Daniel's family. Here, no one questioned if she knew how to work. Her presence alone proved it. When the day's work was done, she would quietly leave, slipping back into her other life as Daniel's wife. She never bragged, never let a hint slip about the empire she was running in secret. To the outside world, she was still the quiet woman who brought nothing into the marriage. But every trip reminded her of the truth. She wasn't depending on anyone's money. She was building her own. Driving back to Lusaka under the fading sun, Aisha whispered to herself, "They think I have nothing. If only they knew." That secret became her shield, her strength, and her silent answer to every insult thrown her way. Driving back to Lusaka under the fading sun, Aisha whispered to herself, "They think I have nothing. If only they knew." That secret became her shield, her strength, and her silent answer to every insult thrown her way. The hall was filled with music, laughter, and bright decorations for Daniel's cousin's engagement party. Everyone was dressed beautifully, and Aisha tried her best to blend in, smiling politely as she moved from group to group. She wanted to enjoy the evening, to feel like part of the family, but once again, her presence became the target of cruel jokes. As the food was being served, one of Daniel's uncles chuckled loudly and said, "Give her a few more months, soon she'll be begging for Daniel's pocket money." His words made several people laugh. Daniel's sisters added, "Exactly, she looks sweet now, but wait until she drains him dry." The laughter grew, spilling from one corner of the hall to another, as if her dignity was nothing more than entertainment for the crowd. Aisha froze, her smile trembling. She felt the sting of humiliation in front of people she barely knew. It wasn't just whispers this time. It was open mockery, bold and shameless, and guests who didn't even know her joined in the laughter as though it were a performance. Her chest tightened, her eyes burned, and before she lost control, she quietly slipped away. In the bathroom, she locked the door and leaned against the sink, tears rolling down her cheeks. She pressed a hand over her mouth to silence the sobs. This was supposed to be a celebration, yet she was being ridiculed like a beggar at her own husband's family event. She looked at herself in the mirror, her makeup perfect, her gown elegant, yet her heart felt broken. Wiping her tears, she whispered to her reflection, "Soon they'll see who really holds the gold." Her voice was shaky but firm. That single sentence became her anchor. They saw her as weak, but she carried a power they could never imagine. When she returned to the party, her face was calm, her posture tall. She laughed softly at conversations, pretending nothing had happened. No one knew that behind her quiet smile was a storm, and one day, it would roar. The turning point came quietly, almost like a dream. One morning in her Copperbelt office, Aisha sat across from a group of international investors. They had been following the growth of her mine, and were impressed by how well she managed it. One of them leaned forward and said, "Mrs. Mwamba, we believe your mine has the potential to be one of the strongest in the region. We'd like to partner with you." Her heart raced, but she kept her calm. They laid out the proposal: new machinery, wider export channels, and a deal worth millions. Aisha listened carefully, asked the right questions, and finally signed the contract with a steady hand. The moment her pen touched the paper, she felt the weight of years of silence, humiliation, and whispered insults begin to lift. Within months, her mind transformed. New equipment roared to life, production doubled, and international buyers lined up. The workers celebrated, proud to be part of something bigger. Newspapers quietly began to notice the success of Mwamba Gold Limited, calling it one of the fastest-growing mining companies in the region. But outside the Copperbelt, Aisha's life remained unchanged. In Lusaka, Daniel's family still mocked her as if she were useless. They whispered the same old words. She only came with a pretty face. Little did they know that behind her quiet smile, she was running an empire worth more than any of them had ever touched. Even Daniel didn't fully understand the scale of what she had built. She shared small pieces with him, but she never revealed everything. Not yet. She wanted the truth to come out at the right time, in the right way, a moment they would never forget. Every night as she lay in bed, Aisha thought about the deal she had signed, about the future that was now unfolding. She remembered the nights she had cried in silence, the dinners where she had swallowed insults instead of food, the parties where laughter had broken her spirit. And she smiled to herself. "They think I came with nothing," she whispered into the dark. "But I came with gold." The day Daniel lost his job, the whole house felt heavy. He came home with tired eyes, his tie loose, and quietly said, "They let me go." Aisha hugged him, holding his shoulders, reminding him he was more than a job. But before long, his family found out, and instead of offering support, they found someone to blame: her. At the next family gathering, his mother shook her head and muttered, "Ever since he married that girl, nothing good has happened. She drained his luck." One of his sisters added cruelly, "What else did you expect? A gold digger will always pull you down." The words spread like wildfire among the relatives, each one nodding, whispering, and pushing Daniel to leave her. Aisha sat there, silent, her heart breaking at how quickly they turned his struggle into her fault. But instead of defending herself with words, she decided to let her actions speak. Quietly, without telling anyone, she began to take care of everything. She paid the mortgage on their home, cleared the electricity bills, and even settled Daniel's outstanding debts. Every kwacha came from her gold mine, the empire no one in his family knew about. At night, Daniel would sigh with relief when bills disappeared and letters of demand stopped arriving. He would hold Aisha's hands and say, "I don't know how we're managing, but thank you for standing by me." She only smiled and kissed his forehead, never revealing the full truth. Meanwhile, his family continued to mock her, insisting she was useless, insisting Daniel should walk away before she ruined him completely. Aisha carried the weight of their insults with quiet strength, knowing that she was the very reason Daniel still had a roof over his head. She whispered to herself when no one was listening, "If only they knew. If only they understood whose hands are keeping this house standing." The more they doubted her, the more determined she became. And though they tried to paint her as a curse, Aisha was the silent blessing holding Daniel's world together. Aisha smiled gently, not in arrogance, but with the quiet pride of a woman who had finally spoken her truth. She leaned back in her chair and said softly, "So now you know who paid for this food, and much more." The silence in the room was louder than all their past insults combined. Gasps filled the room the moment Aisha's words sank in. One aunt nearly dropped her glass, a cousin coughed so hard he almost choked on his food, and Daniel's sisters sat frozen with wide eyes. The screen of Aisha's laptop glowed on the table, her name written boldly under Mwamba Gold Limited. No one dared to laugh now. Aisha looked around at all of them, her face calm, her voice steady. "I didn't marry Daniel for money," she said. "I had my own gold mine before I even met him." Her tone wasn't angry, just firm, like a teacher correcting a class that had been spreading lies for too long. Slowly, she reached into her folder and laid out printed documents across the table. Bank statements with rows of zeros, proof of multimillion-dollar deals, photographs of her in a helmet walking the mine grounds, contracts signed with international investors. Each paper was another piece of truth, and with each one, the silence in the room grew heavier. Daniel's mother stared at the documents as though they were written in another language. The same woman who had once sneered gold digger, now had no words. His sisters, who had rolled their eyes at every family gathering, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even the cousins who laughed the loudest at her expense now sat with their heads down, their appetite gone. Daniel himself looked at his wife with awe. He had always known she was strong, but this was something far greater than he ever imagined. Pride filled his eyes as he realized the woman they mocked was the one carrying them all quietly. Aisha leaned back in her chair, her fingers resting gently on the table. "You called me names, you doubted me, you mocked me in front of strangers. But the truth is, while you were laughing at me, I was building something you could never destroy." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the sound of someone nervously clearing their throat. No one dared to whisper this time. The shockwave of her truth had shaken the entire table, and nothing would ever be the same again. After that dinner, everything changed. The same in-laws who once called Aisha a gold digger suddenly changed their tone. They started visiting the house with forced smiles, bringing small gifts, pretending to care. But their true intentions showed quickly. One afternoon, Daniel's sister pulled Aisha aside and said sweetly, "You know, I've always believed in you. Maybe you could invest a little in my boutique? With your support, it could really grow." A cousin who had once laughed the loudest sent her a message. "Hi, cousin Aisha. I'm looking for a job. Please, I'd be honored to work at Mwamba Gold Limited." Even the uncles who had whispered about her pretty face and empty pockets, now came forward with business proposals, begging her to back their ideas. Aisha listened politely but never forgot the sting of their words. She remembered the nights she had cried in secret, the humiliation she had endured in front of strangers, the way they had laughed when she was silent. Now they wanted her money, her influence, her empire. With grace she set clear boundaries. "I built this to help the community," she told them calmly. "To create jobs for those who were overlooked, to give opportunities to people who truly need them. But I will not reward disrespect. You didn't believe in me then, and I don't need your approval now." Her words were firm but not bitter. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was protecting her peace. She poured resources into schools, funded healthcare in mining villages, and created hundreds of jobs for hardworking families. Her mine became a source of pride for her country, not a private bank for relatives who had once treated her with contempt. Those who mocked her were forced to watch from the sidelines as others benefited from the empire they never believed she could build. Aisha carried herself with quiet dignity, proving that true power isn't just about wealth. It's about knowing when to say no. And every time another cousin or in-law came knocking with fake smiles and desperate hands, she reminded herself of one simple truth: respect cannot be bought, and her success didn't need their approval. The story spread everywhere like fire. Newspapers, TV channels, and blogs all carried the headline: "The woman called a gold digger who owned a gold mine." Cameras flashed, reporters wanted interviews, and suddenly Aisha was no longer the quiet wife who had once been mocked. She was a symbol of strength and surprise. People who had never met her felt inspired, saying her story gave them hope to never let insults define their worth. One powerful image went viral. Aisha, standing proudly in her mining helmet, dust on her hands, the sun setting behind the hills where her mine stood. She wasn't wearing fancy clothes or jewelry. She didn't need to. That helmet, that mine, and that quiet smile were more powerful than any diamond necklace. It showed the world that true wealth comes from courage, hard work, and self-respect. When asked about the pain she went through, Aisha didn't cry or complain. She simply said, "They called me a gold digger. They were right. Except the gold was mine all along." That line was shared thousands of times across social media. People turned it into posters, memes, and even inspirational videos. It became a message for anyone ever doubted, mocked, or underestimated. Daniel stood by her side, proud and protective. For once, his family had nothing to say. The silence of their shame was louder than all their past insults. Aisha didn't need revenge. The truth was her victory, and the world was her witness. Her story closed with a lesson that echoed far beyond her family's dining table. Never judge someone's worth by the lies you tell about them, because one day, their truth might shine brighter than gold.